Today I rise to address a topic under the broad notion of the first three words of our Constitution, we the people. These are the most important three words because they set out the theory, the strategy for our entire Constitution, what it is all about. And that is to ensure that we do not have government of, by, and for the most affluent in our society, or government of, by, and for the titans of commerce and industry. No, but instead, of, by, and for the people, the citizens. And it's within the framework of this Constitution that we find many elements designed to preserve this we the people purpose. Now, in recent years, recent decades, we've had major attacks on the theory of our Constitution, we the people. We've had Buckley versus Vallejo Supreme Court decision 40 years ago that took and said it's all right for the most affluent citizens in our society to drown out the people in the election process. We've had Citizens United, which said the Constitution doesn't say we the people, it says we the titans of commerce and industry, we the corporations. And so the Supreme Court has made several decisions that have taken us far afield. And we see the result of this. We see the impact of policies crafted by a legislature elected with fabulous sums of money from the people at the height of our society, the height of power and influence, of wealth and connections. Well, somehow we have to reclaim our Constitution. In fact, this understanding that something is way off base is the foundation of frustration that we see across our nation. We see it reflected in the presidential campaigns this year on the Democratic side and on the Republican side. People know that something's wrong when over the last 4 decades, virtually every dollar of additional income in our economy has gone to the top 10%. People understand that the middle class is being squeezed and crushed. People are starting to see tent cities pop up in cities across our nation because policies made here are no longer crafted for we the people, but instead for we the titans. Well, I'm going to rise repeatedly to address this challenge. It's at the core of who we are as a nation, the core of our Constitution, and our Constitution is being attacked continuously, and we the people must fight back to reclaim it. And the most recent attack has come from colleagues in this body who said they don't want to honor the responsibilities that they took on when they took the oath of office. One of those responsibilities is to give advice and consent on nominations. And recently we have a majority leader who said, I don't even want to talk to a nominee from the president, let alone take my responsibilities under the Constitution seriously to give advice and consent. So I thought it might be useful to go back and think a little bit about this advice and consent power and how it came to be and what it meant and what it means for us to honor our responsibility today as members of the U.S. Senate. So in those days in which the founders were crafting the Constitution, they had a couple different theories about how they might possibly create this power, and some said it should go solely to the executive, solely to the president. And others said that's too much power to concentrate in single hands. It should go to the body. It should go to a body of the legislature. It should go to an assembly. Now, some decade after our Constitution was signed, we have a paper, a Federalist paper written by Alexander Hamilton that laid out this discussion. And he noted, and I'm going to quote at some length here, that the argument for the executive is as follows. The sole and undivided responsibility of one man will naturally beget a livelier sense of duty and a more exact regard to reputation. He will on this account feel himself under stronger obligations and more interested to investigate with care the qualities requisite to the stations to be filled, and to prefer with impartiality the persons who may have the fairest pretensions to them. So that was the argument for the president to exercise these powers. In addition, there was discussion of the weaknesses of an assembly, a body like the U.S. Senate, having that responsibility all to itself. And again, I'll quote Alexander Hamilton, and he says, "In every exercise of the power of appointing to offices by an assembly, we must expect to see a full display of all the private and party likings and dislikes and partialities and antipathies, attachments and animosities which are felt by those who compose the assembly. The choice which may at any time happen to be made under such circumstances will, of course, result either of a victory gained by one party over the other or a compromise between the two. In either case, the intrinsic merit of the candidate will be too often left out of sight." And so thus the argument for the executive over the assembly to have these appointing powers. But there was a concern, and that's what if the executive, the president, goes off track? Wouldn't it be useful to have a check on nominations when the executive goes off track? And so Hamilton explained why this check on the president's nomination power was placed into the Constitution. And once more I quote, "To what purpose then require cooperation of the Senate? I answer that the necessity of their concurrence would have a powerful, though in general, a silent operation. It would be an excellent check upon a spirit of favoritism in the president and would tend greatly to prevent the appointment of unfit characters from state prejudice, from family connection, from personal attachment, or from a view to popularity. In addition to this, it would be an efficacious source of stability in the administration." And he goes on to note that the body would be expected to approve most nominations, except when there are special and strong reasons for the refusal. So that's our job. That's how it's laid out, that we're to make sure that the power the president has is not exercised in a way that results in unfit characters being appointed. And thus, this mutual system that took the strengths of the assembly as a check, and that is of the Senate, and the strength of the president in terms of accountability was combined. And Hamilton notes, and I quote, "It is not easy to conceive a plan better calculated than this to promote a judicious choice of men for filling the offices of the Union." So that's where we fit in. That's our role. We're to make sure that a nomination, an individual has the preparation, the qualifications, the character, if you will, to fill an office effectively. And Hamilton points out in his conversation, he notes that just the fact that the Senate will be reviewing the nominations will serve as a check for, if you will, off-track nominations, inappropriate nominations. During the time that I've had a chance to be connected to the Senate, and that now spans 4 decades. It was 1976 when I came here as an intern for Senator Hatfield. I saw this body operate as envisioned in the Constitution. I saw this body operate as a simple majority with rare exception. The use of the filibuster was not used to paralyze, and the power of confirmation, of advice and consent of the Constitution was not used to systematically undermine the president because he simply happened to be of a different party. It was not used to undermine the judiciary by keeping judicial vacancies open. And indeed, when this body starts to operate in that fashion, as it has been during the time I've been here as a senator, seeing across the aisle the effort to systematically change the makeup of the court by undermining the responsibility to give advice and consent, then we deeply polarize and undermine this important institution that is our judiciary. And but I must say, even though I've seen for years the effort to really do partisan gain through the strategy of undermining the ability of the president to appoint, I never thought it would come to this. Article 2, Section 2, declares that the President, with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States. This is a responsibility of the President to nominate. It is a responsibility of the members of this body to give advice and consent on that nomination. And here we are today with the majority of this body saying we do not take seriously our responsibility under the Constitution to give advice and consent. Now, we've seen the process of really slow-walking nominations. But this is on a different scale of magnitude. It is our responsibility to have a committee vet the nominees, our responsibility to have a floor debate here on the floor, our responsibility to have a vote. And that certainly is the way that the Senate has operated decade after decade, century after century. I just have to ask to each of my colleagues across the aisle, do you find in this beautiful Constitution any phrase that says the President shall nominate, but only in the first 3 of the 4 years he or she serves in office? Can you find that in the Constitution? Can you truly raise your head and say you are doing your responsibility when you say, I only want to exercise my constitutional responsibility, give advice and consent 3 out of every 4 years, and then I want to take a year off? I think that you will find, if you read the Constitution, you will find that that is not what it says. And the American people know this. And they know that the Supreme Court is very important to calling the balls and strikes when actions or laws move into areas that are out of bounds. That is what the Supreme Court does. It makes sure that our structure of laws and regulations stay within the bounds of the rights and rules of our Constitution. So this is a critical part of the construction of American democracy. The Supreme Court serves as a check on the overreach of the President, the overreach of this body, the overreach of regulators. It can't do its job if it does not have a full set of members. Not since the Civil War has the Supreme Court been left with a vacancy for more than a year. And of course, the Civil War was a very unusual situation. Since the 1980s, every person appointed to the Supreme Court has been given a hearing and a vote within 100 days. Since 1975, it has taken on average 2 months to confirm Supreme Court nominees. 2 months. So, despite what some of my colleagues claim, the President's duty to make nominations to the Supreme Court does not disappear during a presidential election year. Our responsibility to do advice and consent does not disappear in a presidential year. Let's look to history. More than a dozen Supreme Court justices have been confirmed in the final year of a presidency. More recently, Justice Kennedy, who is still on the bench, was confirmed in the last year of President Reagan's final term. And that was done by a Senate led by the opposite party. It was a democratically controlled Senate that honored its responsibility to give advice and consent. The American people spoke overwhelmingly when they re-elected President Obama in 2012 to a 4-year term. They expect him to fulfill his duties for a full 4 years. They expect us to fulfill our duties under the Constitution. The current campaign events do not stop the responsibilities of the U.S. Senate. For the last 200 years, the Senate has carried out its duty to give a fair and timely hearing and a floor vote to the President's Supreme Court nominees. Let us not change that tradition today, this week, or this year. Let's not only honor the tradition, let's honor the constitutional responsibility. I want to note that it's not only the Supreme Court we have to worry about. Last year, the Senate confirmed just 11 federal judges, the fewest in any year since 1960, in the last 56 years. Only one Court of Appeals judge was confirmed, the lowest number in any given year since 1953. The number of judicial emergencies, where there's not enough judges confirmed to do the workload, has nearly tripled over the past year, from 12 in January 2015 to 31 judicial emergencies today. And the obstruction is not limited simply to the judicial branch. The abuse of the advice and consent or disregard of the responsibility extends to the executive branch. Now, when we elect a president is not the president of a party. He or she is the president of the nation. Whether you are a Democrat, whether you are a Republican, the president is our president. And systematically taking party politics to undermine the individual because they were elected from the opposite party diminishes the individuals who serve in this body. It diminishes the stature of this institution, and it diminishes the function of our nation so carefully crafted in our Constitution. So let's ponder the path forward this year. Let's not diminish this institution by forsaking our responsibilities. Let's not politically polarize the court that is so essential to making sure that our laws and regulations and actions stay within the bounds of the Constitution. Let's instead restore this institution. Let's restore the Senate. Let it be at least as healthy as it was as when we were youngsters serving here as interns and coming to D.C. for the first time, or simply reading about it in a book back home. Let's restore the effectiveness of our judiciary. When we have judicial emergencies, we have justice delayed. And justice delayed is justice denied. And that does not honor the vision of the role of justice in the United States of America. So I call on my colleagues to end this obstruction that diminishes your service, diminishes this institution, and damages our nation. In short, do your jobs. Work together as 100 senators for the future of our nation. Thank you, Mr. President.